Good morning. In my opinion, I think we always have an exciting agenda. Today we have something arguably more exciting than most months. So in terms of two quick updates, we've got if anybody tuned into the last call with Momo, our Chief Science Officer, and you heard the studies that he presented in terms of glycemic response to foods and that being integrated into the results, next week, that glycemic index information is going to be reflected in people's results if they had completed a test within the last 90 days. So very exciting on that front, and then obviously all subsequent tests will have that information included as well. The other big piece of news is we are launching a second test. We're launching a food sensitivity test, as we call it, the FSI. This is going to be in addition to the gut microbiome. And on today's call, we've got Samika Savanur, who's she specializes in naturopathic and functional medicine. She's our wellness advocate for the translational science team. What does all that mean? When we get questions from customers about their results, why are specific foods there? How do I interpret these scores more accurately? Those questions get relayed to her and to the translational science team to investigate deeper, and then she's able to boil down all the complex science and put it into layman's terms. The other reason that's hugely beneficial is she's also working with the product team to, again, distill all of that information we get from the results and move it into the app in a way that is understandable for most people. So she's constantly working with that team. Couple quick points on food sensitivity. So the science itself is not new. This is unlike the GI test, which was groundbreaking and doesn't exist anywhere else out there. The food sensitivity test is more of a standard science in terms of it's a at-home blood test that will show, do you have a perceived sensitivity to particular foods? So if it's not a new science, if it's not similar to what we do here at Viome, why would we add that? Well, the reality is that there's, as you guys well know, there's two different systems at play here. There's the microbiome in your gut, which is the foundation of health, of inflammation. And when we look at that with the metatranscriptomic analysis, which is the standard GI test that we have, we're looking at what bugs are there and how are they functioning? What pathways are they creating? And then we make a set of food recommendations based on what bugs do you have there and how should you be feeding them. And the challenge from that is in instances where someone knows that they have a response to gluten or to almonds or to blueberries, and they see that those foods are reflected in their enjoy foods or maybe even their superfoods, that is a disconnect because we're looking at the bugs, we're looking at the microbiome and seeing that they have the bugs to be able to digest those foods. And so theoretically they could be eating those foods. But there's a secondary system at play, which is if you have a leaky gut or for some reason those foods are entering into the bloodstream and causing a reaction with the immune system, which would be a separate system per se, that's something we want to take into account. And so that's the benefit of adding this secondary lens, which is the food sensitivity test, to say, okay, in addition to here's what your microbiome looks like and here's what food you could be eating, we're going to put an additional layer of resolution on that and say, but you may be sensitive to these particular foods. And even though they show up in your enjoy foods or in your food recommendations, you may want to limit those foods until, for at least some period of time. And so what Samika is going to do in this call is she's going to walk through the science of food allergies versus food sensitivities, our particular test, and how all of this integrates together. So as always, if you guys have questions, we're going to unmute you guys for the last 10 minutes of the call to ask those. If you have questions during the call, please submit those through the chat. And one other thing I should add is, much like Momo from the last call, Samika is extraordinarily busy. She's traveling today, so we had to pre-record this call earlier this week like we did with Momo. So again, if we have questions from you guys that we can't answer today, what we'll do is we'll circle those back to Samika. We'll record her answering those, and those will be included when we post the video next week. So without further ado, if I haven't missed anything, Ted, can you roll the tape? Samika, good morning.
Good morning. I'm calling from the Bay Area, California, from the Santa Clara Viome office.
Well, Samika, we're excited to have you today.
Thank you for having me.
This is something that's been long awaited and I think is going to dramatically change the resolution with which we look at people's results and answer a lot of questions around the margins as to how we interpret results. So tell us a little bit what you're going to walk us through today.
Sure. Yeah. Today I wanted to kind of dive into food sensitivity testing. This is a product that we're really excited to launch in the near future. And so I kind of wanted to give a really good introduction to the topic of food sensitivities and have people understand it much better and how they can pair that with their gut intelligence test results.
Terrific. And I was just about to ask you about 5 questions, but I'll let you get into the slides before I start making
Okay.
it back
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah. Feel free to interrupt and ask clarifying questions. I'll be happy to talk about it. But yeah, I just wanted to get into the meat of it. So a lot of people can interchange the terms food allergy and food sensitivity. And I really wanted to drive home the point that there is a clear distinction between an allergy and a sensitivity. And some take-home points with that is that a food allergy develops quite immediately to a response to a specific food versus a food sensitivity can be a delayed response. And before we dive into sensitivity versus allergy, I wanted to bring about the topic of immunoglobulins or antibodies. And so these are proteins that our immune system will create and produce as an alarm if something that the body recognizes as foreign, which is an antigen, or not self that enters our system. It's a defense mechanism. So it's meant to protect you from anything that may seem harmful. And some of the antibodies that are commonly known out there are IgA, IgM, and IgG. So let's talk about food allergies. It's pretty straightforward. Like I said in the previous slide, it happens quite immediately after ingesting a particular food, typically within an 8-hour period. So it's mediated by the IgE antibodies specifically. And so with that immediate immune response, your body will produce histamine, and that's usually released from our mast cells. And that can lead to some life-threatening symptoms such as anaphylaxis or hives. And so those are pretty scary. And once you know you have a food allergy, it's really easy to kind of eliminate that from your diet altogether. And so the best way to find out is by going to your doctor and getting either a skin or a blood test to find out which food allergies you have. So that it's pretty concrete, once you know you have a food allergy, definitely don't want that to be part of your meal planning. Food sensitivities, on the other hand, are a bit trickier to identify, but I kind of want to walk us through this topic of sensitivities in general. So food sensitivities are reactions from the IgA, IgM, and IgG antibodies, and that is a response to inflammation, typically within our gastrointestinal lining or our gut. The thing to keep in mind is that even though there are 3 different antibodies that are a response to a food sensitivity, the primary antibody that's taken into consideration is the IgG, so immunoglobulin G. That being said, IgG antibodies are the largest circulating antibody in our immune system, meaning that it has a higher half-life, so it stays in our bloodstream much longer. And typically, our food sensitivities can develop gradually and slowly. The time frame with these are between a 48 to 72 hour time frame after eating a particular food. And these are usually not life-threatening symptoms. A lot of them vary from either digestive related, so constipation, diarrhea, sometimes abdominal pain, headaches, migraines, skin issues like eczema, psoriasis, acne, maybe even joint pain, difficulty sleeping, or just general fatigue. And like I said earlier, with the inflammation relating to our gastrointestinal lining, one of the most common causes of food sensitivities is gut hyperpermeability. And that means that somehow there is a compromise in our gut lining, and certain components of our foods that we were eating or the byproducts of them, which should normally stay in our gut, crosses over and makes its way into our bloodstream, which then can trigger an immune response. And that's what elicits the IgG antibody production.
So Samika, before you move forward,
Yeah.
do we have a sense of what the half-life of the IgG is?
Yeah, I think typically on average it's about 21 days, but depending on the person, it can vary. But typically on average, the IgG antibody stays in our system for about 21 days. That's a good question.
So what that means, if I'm hearing you right, is if I ingest a food that I am sensitive to, I am not going to, in my symptoms really from that last bullet are going to show up somewhere between today and 3 days from now. I'm then not going to feel well again, or I'm not going to be completely rid of those symptoms for the better part of a month. Is that fair?
Yes, that is fair to say. And actually, I'm going to, you're jumping ahead to a really good point I want to talk about later, but it's good to kind of give these teasers and highlights ahead of time. So yeah, I just want to say that it depends on the person. So yeah, typically people don't really have those symptoms immediately, but it can take up to maybe, let's say, 3 weeks for them to really notice it. But the key is once you get your food sensitivity test results back and then you remove that trigger food from your diet, it's a matter of, oh, do you notice any of those symptoms either resolving or reducing in severity? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll keep quiet as you keep going.
No, that's okay. That's okay. No, these are good questions. So like I was saying earlier, typically with food sensitivities, it's a much longer immune response. And so what makes it tricky to identify is that you as a person will be eating so many different types of foods within that time frame for those symptoms to appear that it's hard to kind of pinpoint which are the trigger foods during that process. So yeah, what happens when you do have a food sensitivity? So like I said earlier, just because you have an IgG immune response may not always lead to obvious symptoms or symptoms that you may take notice of very easily. So I wanted to give an example, and that's why I have this little cappuccino image here. So let's say you're an avid cappuccino drinker. You like to have your 1 cappuccino in the morning every single day, but then you take your food sensitivity intelligence test and the results come back and it tells you that you have a high sensitivity to one of the proteins found in milk. And you think to yourself, that's interesting. I've been drinking my cappuccino with milk for as long as I can remember, and I don't really notice any weird symptoms. But let's say you take your results to heart and you're like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to avoid the milk for a month. And during that month, you realize that, oh, wow, maybe my sleep did improve, or, my skin has been clearing up, or I don't feel as itchy, or you notice some of these rashes that just kind of would show up sporadically, kind of disappear and don't reappear. So there are studies in the scientific literature that do suggest that, an IgG response can contribute to a wide range of symptoms, like I mentioned earlier, but individuals can experience one or more with varied severity. So we really have to keep in mind that everybody's body is unique, everyone's immune system is unique, and so kind of taking it and figuring out what works best for you is the best decision you can make for your health and wellness.
And Samika, to your point from earlier,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody goes into that self-experiment, eliminating the milk for a month, but then at the 2-week or the 3-week mark has a lapse of of willpower and needs a cappuccino late in the day on a Thursday or something like that, they've then reset the clock on the food sensitivity, because now it's another 2 to 4 weeks for that to clear out of the system, right?
Right. And who knows, maybe even just eliminating it for 2 weeks, maybe if they had that lapse of judgment and decided to go for that cappuccino that one day, maybe their symptoms won't be as pronounced as it used to be, or they'll be able to differentiate like, oh, wow, actually, I didn't get that weird headache that I normally do. So yeah, it's interesting. That's why it's kind of like looking at it as a little science experiment on yourself to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and finding that happy middle ground. So yeah, this next slide, I wanted to kind of show some of the most common symptoms that could be caused or could be contributed to due to a food sensitivity. But, even if you don't experience any of these symptoms, you might still have a sensitivity. So it's really interesting that you could be asymptomatic, but still have a sensitivity to certain foods. So just looking at this list, a lot of them are either digestive related, there's headaches, fatigue, brain fog, skin issues and skin conditions, all the way to behavioral and mood issues. So it's a wide range. So it's good to kind of do some self-exploration with that.
So on that note, I have to ask, because everything else seems pretty straightforward in terms of digestive tract stuff, except for the behavioral and mood issues. So aside from me maybe being hangry or being a little agitated because I haven't had my cappuccino for 3 days in a row, what would cause behavioral or mood issues based on the IgG if I'm eating something I shouldn't be?
Yeah, there is some literature stating that having, highly reactive foods that triggers the IgG response could lead to anxiety, could lead to depression. It just comes down to that individual's biochemistry, their metabolism, and all of that. But there is some research showing that eating some highly reactive foods can lead to anxiety, increased heart rate, things like that.
Now, does that have to do with the neurotransmitters that are produced in the gut?
That's a good question. Yeah. One of our most common neurotransmitter, serotonin, about like 90% of it is produced in our gut. I don't know if there's a strong correlation with that. That's something that I think is still being investigated, but hopefully in the near future we get an answer to that. Yeah, good question. So now I wanted to kind of present what Viome's food sensitivity intelligence test is going to look like, the panel. So there's going to be about 40 of the most common foods that are widely consumed in our diet. And as you can see, it's a good variety of, gluten is a pretty common allergenic food. And then there's different grains, there's corn, different nuts and seeds. There's the milk and the milk containing proteins, there's egg, some of the nightshade vegetables, different other vegetables, and then meats, shellfish, and then some fruits and spices. So I wanted to bring our attention to lactose intolerance. So our food sensitivity intelligence test is not going to evaluate for food intolerances, but just to kind of educate people that lactose intolerance are people who lack the enzyme lactase. And so without this enzyme, they're unable to digest lactose, which is a milk sugar. However, we will be testing for 2 of the milk-containing proteins, which are casein and whey.
So, Samika, if I have, I think you're going to go into this. Hang on. I'll keep you rolling.
Oh, no, go for it. Did you have a good question?
I don't know if it's a good question, but I was going to say the lactose, the lack of that enzyme to break down lactose versus the proteins within dairy are really looking at 2 different systems. So when we think about the food sensitivity test, which I don't know if we've touched on this, is a blood test, meaning things have to cross into that realm to be detected and to cause these issues with IgG. Those are only going to be casein and whey versus the lack of the enzyme to break down lactose, which is just a deficiency in the gut microbiome.
Correct, yes. So just to clarify, it is a blood test. Thank you for bringing that up. So it'll be the antibodies that are detected in your bloodstream at the moment of testing. So yeah, we're not evaluating for if you have enough of this enzyme or if you have a mutation or, or lack of that enzyme. That's correct. We'll just be looking to see if you're mounting an immune response to the 2 proteins found in milk.
And the last question I have is, would the GI tests, the stool test, be accounting for the lactose intolerance? Meaning if we don't see particular bugs or activity from bugs that would be producing the enzyme to break down lactose?
To the top of my, what comes to mind is I don't believe that our gut intelligence test can also evaluate for intolerances, but I know that there are certain scores linked to other types of intolerances. But I think that's something that's going to be coming in the future. At the moment, we're unable to identify food intolerances just based on the gut intelligence test.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Good question, though. So this is just a quick little overview of the differences between the 2 milk-containing proteins, casein and whey. I think the most interesting thing to take home with this is that casein takes much longer to digest. That's why it stays in our body. for a longer time versus whey, our bodies are able to digest it a little bit faster, and so it exits our body at a quicker rate. So what might you learn from your food sensitivity intelligence test results? So it's basically understanding, your IgG response to the 40 different foods in our panel. And so your results could either be no sensitivity detected, low sensitivity, medium sensitivity, or high sensitivity. Another thing to keep in mind is that your food sensitivity intelligence results will be overlaid on top of your food recommendations. So food placement is solely determined by your gut intelligence test and the personal information we receive from you, and the food sensitivity intelligence results will be noted for your information. This is a common question that I've been asked before in the past is, so what do I do? Raw versus cooked foods, do I need to avoid both forms? So there is research showing that, cooking the foods can change the structure of the protein, and then as a result can change your immune response to that food. However, it's safe to avoid both forms. So let's say you have a high sensitivity to bell pepper. It's probably best to avoid the cooked and raw form for the time being until you do some gut repair and gut healing.
Now, does that mean, Samika, that at some point in the future, because when we looked at the food sensitivity list, there was a lot of pretty tasty options on that people may not start cutting out. So does that hold out hope that if we can create the appropriate repairs of the gut lining so these are no longer permeating at the same rate and getting into the bloodstream, we might be able to add these foods back in down the line?
Yeah, so the underlying issue here is to reduce inflammation overall and giving your gut the right environment to kind of repair the lining and the integrity. So that way we're not provoking more of an immune response, we're not promoting the inflammatory pathways, and we're not allowing these molecules or metabolites to seep into our bloodstream and mount that immune response again. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle. Is like, okay, underlying premise is let's quell the inflammation first. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, let's remove these trigger foods for X amount of weeks. Let's talk to my doctor, your practitioner, and get some ideas on, gut repair, gut healing, things that are anti-inflammatory, and then figure out when is the appropriate time to reintroduce those foods back into your diet. So it really depends on the individual. I mean, some people feel strongly about not bringing certain foods back into their diet just because they feel so much better excluding them. Some people are, attached to those foods and feel like, it's a sensitivity as long as it's not being a huge detrimental issue. It's not compromising the quality of my life, my overall wellness, then I'm fine with eating it occasionally. So people have different responses to their food sensitivities. I think overall it's providing that information to the customer or to that patient and giving them all the resources so that way at the end of the day they can make the best decision for themselves.
The reality is there's no perfect roadmap for everybody.
Exactly. We're all unique individuals, and it's making sure that they are equipped with the right information, and then they can kind of make that decision for themselves or get the guidance from their healthcare provider too.
Yeah, probably. I mean, in all those cases, probably cut those foods out for at least some period of time so you can start to see the response and if you feel different, and then make it better.
Right. And I mean, in the past, when I've worked with individuals, it comes down to compliance too. It's so easier said than done. Like, just avoid these foods. But some people are very committed and, they take the liberty of, avoiding those foods, and they come back feeling much stronger and saying, hey, I feel much better and I can confidently say that I'm not going to have these foods back into my diet. So it comes down to the individual. But people have noticed some significant improvements from at least removing some of the most reactive IgG foods from their diet. And I'm going to dive into that topic soon too.
Terrific. I'll let you go.
So I think I mentioned this earlier, but food sensitivity testing is still an unexplored realm, but there is a growing body of literature supporting that removing these reactive foods, like I said, can reduce or resolve some of your symptoms. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And so I want people to understand that, we're not diagnosing food sensitivities, so it shouldn't be viewed as a diagnostic test. However, we kind of want to equip you with the right information and kind of shed light on how you can improve your overall wellness. And so I would actually use this panel as a tool to assess what foods you're really taking in or incorporating into your diet, and then making sure that you talk to your healthcare provider. So this does not replace, any professional medical advice or treatment. And we encourage you to share your results and your decisions on when it comes to the foods you decide to keep in your diet or exclude from your diet.
So I was going to say, in practice, in the app, the way this is going to work is, we get questions back from clients saying, hey, look, A, B, and C food were in my enjoy foods or in my superfoods. And I know personally that when I eat those foods, I don't feel well. I have some sort of reaction to them. Right. In this instance, if we look at the food sensitivity and we layer that on top and say, okay, you have the microbes. We looked at your stool sample. You have the bugs active to break these things down. In fact, these foods could be beneficial to you. But when we look at the second food sensitivity test, there's an indication there that it's causing an issue with that secondary system. And for that reason, you may want to exclude those foods.
Right, exactly. So that's a good point. So let's say, one of your superfoods is something that you have a medium sensitivity towards. So we'll note that down next to that superfood, because for your microbiome, there are some important macronutrients or micronutrients, or you have certain pathway activities or the beneficial organisms that can utilize that. But for some reason, your immune response is responding in a negative way. So it's up to you if you want to continue eating that or kind of, explore this next topic, which I was going to talk about, is the elimination food plan. I don't know if you guys have heard of this before, but it's considered one of the gold standards when it comes to identifying and addressing food sensitivities. So there's many different types of elimination food plans out there, but the primary goal is to help your body clear away any of the foods or the ingredients that could be contributing to or aggravating your symptoms. So the premise behind the elimination food plan is you eliminate those foods, like I talked about earlier, for a certain period of time. So it's usually 3 to 4 weeks. And then depending on how many reactive foods you have, you slowly reintroduce a specific food one at a time. And then you monitor your symptoms for possible reactions to see, does having the milk, aggravate my acne, or does having the milk aggravate the migraines that I haven't been experiencing for the past 4 weeks? So treat it like your own little research project. So the best things to do to prepare for this is, give yourself a week or 10 days to look up recipes that fit your elimination diet, that are friendly to kind of incorporate, not too difficult, nothing that's, way over your head so that your compliance will go down the drain. We want it to be kind of easy to incorporate and approach. And make sure you do your grocery shopping and your research ahead of time so you know which foods you'll want to keep in your pantry or your fridge. That way, cooking time and prep time, it won't take a huge load during the day. And then get rid of all the trigger foods from your kitchen and pantries. So it's going to take a lot of willpower, but I think the best thing is to kind of make a list and go through your kitchen and figure out, okay, I definitely can't have this for the next month. So either give it to a family member or a friend, or eat it before you decide to start the elimination.
Yeah. One final binge. Eat everything you shouldn't be eating on the same day and clear it out.
Right. Because it would be such a waste, to have all this good food, go away, or you can't really enjoy it. So it's like, have that last final meal before you dive into this tailored process of figuring out, which trigger foods, are really aggravating your symptoms.
And the one thing I'll add to that, and this was from a previous ambassador call that we did with Shayna Reed, who, for those that didn't see the call, she's lost over 180 pounds utilizing.
Yeah, I saw that. That's awesome.
She did the exact same thing. She eliminated from her kitchen, her pantry, anything that she shouldn't be eating. And that was the system in place that, if it's not there, she won't eat it.
Exactly. There's no constant reminder of that food being there. It's not in your environment, so you're less likely to kind of fall to the cravings of that food. Yeah. And that, I mean, that goes hand in hand with eating out too. So I know a lot of people that, took this seriously and were very compliant and, research restaurants where, they had additional options for them, or, they cut down on their eating out expenses and decided to just, cook at home and save money that way. So, there's pros and cons to doing the elimination food plan. But yeah, that kind of concludes my overview of the food sensitivity test. Rob, if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask them.
So I am very excited that we'll be rolling this out. On the actual call, I'm sure we'll announce when that's going to be, which will be in a few weeks, I believe.
Yeah.
And talk about the specifics of who can order it and how the results will show. But simplistically, I think we touched on why this is so beneficial. Oh, the question I do have that I get a lot when it comes to this test is this science unique to Viome, related to the food sensitivity, or is this more of a industry standard?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not unique. Food sensitivity panels have existed for years, but there's different kinds that exist out there depending on which, IgG or IgA or IgM they want to look at. I think for clinical utility purposes, most tests will evaluate the IgG antibody.
And so the way that we would look at this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is your gut microbiome is the foundation. It is the primary element of your body's inflammation and overall health. And so that's, when we look at these two tests side by side, that is the first thing we should be looking at, and then utilize the food sensitivity as an additional lens or resolution to look at the results and refine the way we interact with these results. Is that fair?
Yes, that is a fair assessment. I think taking your gut intelligence results as the foundation is crucial. And then, like you said, overlaying the food sensitivity results on top of that. So I would say pair these together and figure out what works for you when it comes to meal planning and meal prep. So that is absolutely correct, Rob.
Terrific. And then what we'll do, Samika, is if we get any additional questions on the call that we are unable to answer and we need your expertise, Ed and I can do a quick secondary recording that we can add on to the overall call before we post it live on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, that works out. Yeah, sorry it didn't work out earlier for me to do it on Friday itself, but I'd be happy to do a second recording to maybe just like a Q&A session.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, Samika, can't thank you enough for this. This has been a long time coming. You guys have been, the scientists, the masterminds behind this, have been working furiously for months to refine this, get it perfect, and to make it turnkey and simplistic for clients and patients to understand how it interacts with the GI essential test, or the stool test as well. So thanks for all you do, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Rob, so much. Appreciate it. Glad to be a guest and look forward to talking again. Take care.
Well, I hope that you guys all got at least some value out of that. I'm sure that you did. It touched on a number of the questions that we get from, or at least that we've previously gotten from customers and from you guys about, okay, we're also doing, in addition to Viome, this food sensitivity test. How does that relate to what you guys do? So hopefully that was helpful. In the interim, what I'm going to share is, in terms of this test, the soft launch, as we're calling it, is happening today for the next few weeks. And what that means is that for a select group of about 1,000 customers in select states that meet certain criteria, they'll have access to this test to be able to try it at home, to see how everything functions. Is the test as easy as we think it is to do at home? We'll look at how the results pair on people's phones or people's apps and people's online accounts with the GI test. And then once we've completed that, we will give you guys the heads up once this goes officially live to everybody. So for the next few weeks, again, this will just be for a small group of people, relatively speaking, but hopefully very shortly we'll be launching to the rest of the public. I just got the heads up from Ted that everybody can unmute themselves if they have any questions, so we'll open up for that. And the first question, yeah, so Mimi, can we ourselves try this? The answer at the moment is no. It's just going to be that small pilot group of 1,000 people for the moment, but hopefully in subsequent weeks or early this summer, we'll be opening that up live to everybody. So, and you guys will get ample notice about when this goes live and what the pricing is going to look like for each of you and all of those sorts of things. So that is still to come.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, Maureen.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So as a practitioner, and I think most of the people on this call are practitioners of some sort, you know, we've been doing food sensitivity testing through various labs. So is there some inherent benefit in doing it through Viome as opposed to just potentially linking, like the Viome panel is not as extensive, for example, which is fine. You know, this is all great. I love that you're doing this. But is there some inherent like benefit of doing it through Viome versus marrying the test results from another lab with their Viome results?
Great question, Maureen. So yes, as Samika mentioned in the call, this technology related to the food sensitivity, it has been around for years and was kind of the standard for a long time. And so when you look at us versus other tests, the benefit of the other tests, if they're more extensive, meaning, you know, we do 40 foods. If a test does 70 or more, arguably that is a better test. So then what's the intrinsic value of doing it with Viome? The benefit is in your GI results, and I should make this clear, you can only do the FSI in addition to the GI. This is not a standalone test because the reality is it's not the foundational test. So the benefit of doing the food sensitivity on top of the Viome is any of your foods that show up in your enjoy or your minimize or your superfoods that you have a sensitivity to, there'll be an asterisk there. There'll be some explanation as to what that means and some guidance as to how you should proceed related to that perceived food sensitivity.
So it consolidates information in their app and might simplify for them knowing like what foods to go after or what foods to really avoid. So for us that are, for people that have challenges in making changes.
Yeah, and this comes back to, you know, I say this on every call that you guys are the foundation of moving Viome in the right direction because you guys are the ones dealing with customers and with clients and getting feedback that we can integrate into this. And for, you know, the last 6 months, the question we got a lot was, I know that I have X food sensitivity or food allergy, and yet those foods are showing up in my enjoy or my superfoods. What do I do? And so this is a way for us to address that and to say, look, these are two different systems. Here's how you should interpret both of those. And the benefit of doing it with Viome is that it's all consolidated in one place.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Great question.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can. Good morning, Mimi.
Hi. I am very happy that you're covering this. Wondering if you have any content on the site that someone like me can repurpose, because I've been wondering this distinction and working with clients to just tell them, by the way, you know, you need to look at your sensitivity over this superfood if that's the case, and consider you might be allergic or sensitive. So do you?
I don't believe we have anything specifically tailored to FSI at this time. I do know that by the time we have the official full launch, we will. We've got Samika and others putting together content on this for educational purposes for you guys, and then obviously for clients as well, to explain really what we just reviewed, which is what are the differences here and how does how do you interpret these results in terms of your food choices, and how do you integrate it into your life? So the short answer is, at the time, we do not, but it is certainly coming down the pipeline, because, it's a great question that you have, and it's you're not the only one who has that. This is certainly educational material that we need out there.
Okay, wonderful. And then do you have anything currently, and have you talked, I don't think so, on the forums about plant viruses?
I don't know if we've mentioned that before. It's a great question. I know that we get that. Yeah, so we get that question a lot, which is, I have a virus. My results show that I have a virus. It's the spinach virus or the tomato virus. And the question usually entails, how did I ingest this, and how do I get rid of it? And is it really an issue?
Exactly.
And I don't know if we've had guests talk about that in the past, but the reality is, you ingested, that particular virus feeds on the plant that its namesake plant. You ingested that plant, and now the virus is part of your microbes. In order to get rid of that virus, they don't stick around that long if you don't feed them. So if you were to avoid that food for a couple of weeks, that's usually enough to starve it out. And that information is reflected in your food recommendations. So and I think we need to do a better job of explicitly drawing that connection, but when you see foods in your avoid list or your minimize list, it may be in fact due to that particular virus. And that's also one of the reasons that we want people to retest, because your avoid foods may not be your avoid food forever. They may be simply there because you had a particular virus that may have had time to die off if you followed the recommendations appropriately. So that's why I want you, because, spinach, for example, if you have the ability to digest oxalates, can have some great benefits. I mean, obviously it's healthy for a lot of people, and to avoid that forever because you had the virus at one particular time doesn't make sense if you've gotten rid of that virus. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just think the topic of, by the way, plants, veggies can have viruses as well, and what are the repercussions and impact on the biome. I just think it's fascinating. Thank you for the answer.
You're very welcome, Mimi. So one of the questions from Nancy, how about blood types, genotypes of the foods that are good or not good for us? So in terms of blood type and genotypes, I don't believe that's going to be part of the FSI test. I think this is strictly just do we see the antibodies associated with a particular food in the blood? So I think it's going to be just limited to that. But I will double check on that and shoot you guys an email on it. Do we have any other questions? I'll do a last call here.
I do, Rob.
Maureen.
So I just retested, which was exciting to get the results. But I just need to clarify. In the first round, which I did about a year ago, like different times that I would log into the app, my foods would have changed in terms of slightly. They weren't always a big change. So with the new CLIA certification, is it now like this is the list you abide by, so to speak, until you retest, or will there be some suggested changes so that there's a new, more diversity, a change in the diversity in the foods that are eating or the foods that are being avoided? I can't remember exactly. I feel like it's been discussed, but I couldn't remember.
That is a great question. It's probably our most common question. So I think most people want the silver bullet. They want the list of foods to eat forever and all eternity. And if they eat those foods and abide by it, they'll be healthy forever. The reality is that our microbiome is fluid, and I think we as humans are not robots. And so at least for me, I have trouble eating the same stuff forever, meaning my gut at the end of the holiday season, when I was living on cookies and cake and wine, was probably not the same microbiome that I had 3 weeks earlier, or that I had in January, once I start to implement all of my New Year's resolutions for at least the first 2 weeks of the year. And so I'm going to touch on two other things. Last year, because a lot of clients did see that their food recommendations would change based on the same sample over the course of different iterations. And the reason for that is last year, the app itself, meaning the AI, which is our ability to make correlations and causations between symptoms and what we see in people's samples, went through 8 major iterations, meaning it went through 8 different changes to improve. So theoretically, each of those food recommendation changes was an improvement on the last one, which arguably is a good thing. The challenge is that your microbiome is going to change over the course of 6 to 12 weeks after your first sample. And so if we're changing your food recommendations 6 months or 8 months down the line based on a sample that's the better part of a year old, your microbiome is probably not reflected by that old sample. And so to give you new food recommendations based on who your gut microbes were 8 months ago is not all that relevant. And so 2 things on that. The first is I've talked with the engineering team this year. The nice thing is we're not going to be going through 8 major iterations. We're going to be having maybe 1 or 2. And after 90 days, your food recommendations will freeze, because after that point, it doesn't make sense to be adding new food choices anyway. So that should remedy that problem. The other thing I'll say is when you do the test and you get your first set of food recommendations, if you were to follow those food recommendations, your gut should adjust in a better trajectory over those first 6 to 12 weeks. And after that 12 weeks, if you've implemented and abided by the food recommendations, you now have a slightly different gut. Some of your viruses may have died off. Some things may have changed. You may be able to add back in some foods that were on your avoid or your minimize list more robustly. And for that reason, we ask people to retest and see where they are now. And then it's a function after that point, if you are, I don't want to say religious about it, but if you're consistent about your food recommendations going forward, there should be less and less variation in your microbiome, provided you're not traveling too much or on antibiotics, and you can kind of stick around those same, and then you need to test less frequently. So I hit it a lot there. Did that all make sense?
I don't understand the freezing. What do you mean by that?
So
I mean, I know what the word freezing, what technically, but in these next 90 days, since I just got my results, I don't know, in the last couple days. So between now and the beginning of August, will my foods change?
So
in the app or no?
90 days is about the window that your sample is relevant.
I gotcha.
Gut is similar to the same gut. And so if the app changes during those 90 days and it becomes better, we will update your foods.
I gotcha.
It's relevant. After that 90 days, your old sample is not really relevant. And so to give you a better interpretation of that sample is more confusing than it is beneficial.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now that makes sense. And so then also, Samika mentioned that or maybe you did, that the blood glucose data is going to show up in results that were done within the last 90 days. Is that what you said?
Yes. So if you were on the call with Momo, where he talked about the difference between 2 people both eating a banana and both eating bread and having completely different blood sugar responses to both of those foods.
Yeah.
And so we should accommodate for that in people's results. That technology, that accounting for that in people's results will be effective next week, and it will be applicable to people who have tested in the last 90 days. To your original point, which is if the sample is still relevant, we'll update your foods to accommodate that.
So does a notice come out, or you just like look at it, look for in the app that there's going to be a new page on the app or a new something?
So there won't be a new page. This will just be incorporated into how we sort your foods in terms of food versus enjoy food versus minimize food. For instance, so if somebody like me needs to run on starchy carbs like potatoes, and somebody is the exact opposite and has a massive insulin dump or glycemic response when they have potatoes, if both of us had potatoes as enjoy foods, mine may move to a superfood because it's now better for me, and theirs may move to a minimized food because it's not as good for them.
Okay. I like that. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thanks.
You're very welcome. And we're coming up right on the hour. Does anybody else have any closing questions? Okay, terrific. Well, I want to thank you guys all for joining today's call. I know I say this every time, but you guys really do drive the direction of Viome and our growth. And we really appreciate your support and, more importantly, your feedback, because things like the FSI test are a direct result of you guys coming back with questions and concerns as it relates to the customers that you deal with. So continue to give us that feedback. We love it. I want to thank everybody that helps put these together, because it's it's much more work for them than it is for me. So Ted, Erica, Ashley, the rest of the CX team, you guys are terrific. Thank you very much. And I know Samika's not on this call, but I appreciate her giving us some time and her insights. So if anybody has any questions, shoot me or shoot the help desk an email. Otherwise, everybody enjoy your Friday and have a great weekend.